In this video, I'm gonna talk about my number one go-to lens that I use on vacations, and I gotta tell you, it helps me a lot. It's the Panasonic Lumix G Vario 14-140mm f3.5 to 5.6 to ASPH. As always, we will go through 12 things from physical aspects to image quality tests, so this is a detailed lens review. But before we go through the 12 aspects, let me show you some photos. Look, as mentioned, I use it on vacations and I'm pretty satisfied with the results. Because it's a super zoom lens, I don't need anything else. It covers wide angles and telephoto perspectives. Hang in there because at the end of this clip, I'm gonna show you a lot of photos. Let's start the lens review. First thing, build quality. I have always enjoyed Panasonic lenses. Even though our super zoom lens is entirely covered in plastic, it doesn't feel cheap at all. The focusing and zoom rings are solid. They twist with the right amount of resistance, giving you the impression that you can rely on them and that they will never fail. On the side, we have a switch that turns image stabilization on or off, and on the back, we have a metal mount. Unfortunately, we do not see a weather sealing gasket, but overall, when it comes to build quality, this lens is pretty solid. Next up, compatible cameras. This super zoom lens was created for micro four thirds sensors, and here comes a major advantage. It will also work on Olympus cameras. Whether it's Panasonic or Olympus, as long as it's a micro four thirds mirrorless camera, this super zoom lens will work on it. Let's now see the focal length. A super zoom lens gives you a lot of flexibility. It has a generous zoom but also a wide angle. The full frame equivalent of this lens goes from 28 to 280 mm. It covers a lot of space. It makes your photography easier. Now you understand why I take it on vacations. It's perfect for those moments when you just wanna chill. And of course, you can also take it on the streets. Just remember to also use prime lenses because a super zoom lens, due to its convenience, can turn you into a lazy photographer. Moving to size and weight. This is one of the smallest and lightest super zoom lenses ever made. With the length of just 7.5 centimeters, it occupies a very small space in your camera bag and it weighs just 265 grams. Let's now see the aperture values. The minimum aperture values go from f3.5 to f5.6 while you're zooming, so unfortunately it doesn't let in a lot of light. But when it comes to super zoom lenses, this is a typical performance. The maximum aperture value is f22 and it stays this way throughout the zoom range. And now we see that it has 7 rounded aperture blades. Related to this, later in the image quality tests, we will see how the bokeh looks like. Sixth aspect, focusing. As you can see, this lens is blazing fast when it comes to focusing. It sometimes does have a tendency to focus hunt, but it's not a bad performance. On top of that, it focuses in complete silence, so video shooters will appreciate this. Image stabilization. Unfortunately, my Panasonic G7 doesn't have IBIS, but here's where this super zoom lens saves me. Let me show you. Now we have the image stabilization turned off, and here it is turned on. I have to say, comparing it to other lenses, this is quite a good performance. Photographers and videographers will definitely bring in more shots thanks to this IS. Okay, those were the physical aspects. Now it's time for another moment of truth. Let's go through the 5 image quality tests. First one, sharpness. I photographed this image that I created in Photoshop at different focal lengths. At 14mm f3.5, the middle of the image looks nice. Good sharpness and contrast, no chromatic aberrations. If we want a slightly better result, we can close down to f4.5. And I've noticed the best performance at f5.6, where sharpness looks excellent. Let's now see the corner where things are always more challenging. At f3.5, this lens struggles. We see green and purple chromatic aberrations on contrasting edges. Not an awful performance on sharpness, but it could have been better. We get a big improvement if we stop down to f5.6. Chromatic aberrations have greatly reduced and sharpness looks decent, but for the best performance, we'll have to stop down to f8. Here, sharpness looks good, but unfortunately, we still see chromatic aberrations. Let's zoom in halfway to 70mm. Now, the minimum aperture is f5.4, but the middle of the image is slightly softer than what we saw earlier at 17mm f3.5. We also see some chromatic aberrations. It's not too bad, but if we want a good result, we'll have to stop down to f8 where sharpness improves and chromatic aberrations persist. In the corner, surprisingly, we have the same amount of chromatic aberrations. Sharpness didn't receive an improvement. We have quite a soft corner at f5.4. I saw a decent performance at f6.3, but for a good result, we'll have to go all the way to f8 where we see low levels of chromatic aberrations. Let's zoom in all the way to 140mm. At the widest aperture, the middle of the image got even more softer. We also have some small amount of chromatic aberrations. For a decent result, we'll have to stop down to f8 where sharpness looks good but not great. Let's see the corner. When we are fully zoomed in, the corners look bad. They are soft and we do see chromatic aberrations. Not even now, at f8, we don't see a good result. From my tests, I saw that f9 delivers the best results at 140mm, where we finally see decent sharpness with small amounts of chromatic aberrations. As you saw, the image gets softer and softer as we zoom in, but we also have less chromatic aberrations if we zoom in. When it comes to sharpness at normal distances, this is an average performance for a super zoom lens. Not bad, but also not great. Moving to distortion and vignetting. At 18mm, we see a slight barrel distortion, but I've seen worse performances in super zoom lenses. Something we should worry more about are those corners, very dark at f3.5. Only if we close down to f5.6, we'll see a decent result, bright corners. Let's zoom in halfway to 70mm where we have no distortions. The lines are nice and straight and even the corners got brighter. For a slightly better performance in the corners, we can stop down to f8. Let's go all the way to 140mm where, again, nothing to worry about when it comes to distortions. What is worrying are those corners dark at the widest available aperture. If we stop down to f8, they'll become a bit brighter. When it comes to distortions, the lens shows a good performance with a slight barrel distortion only at 18mm. On vignetting, we see an average performance for a super zoom lens, but remember, all in-camera corrections were turned off during testing, so if you want bright corners, you can always turn on the in-camera peripheral illumination correction. Moving to close-up image quality. Here we are at 140mm and 30 cm away from the subject, the minimum focusing distance of this lens. At f5.6, sharpness and contrast are decent, but not great. An average performance, especially now that we see a tiny amount of chromatic aberration. Sharpness and contrast will look great if we stop down to f8 or even f9. If we close the aperture more, of course, the image will get softer because of the effect of diffraction. At f14 and beyond, this lens will start losing big amounts of sharpness. An average performance on close-ups and diffraction. Let's now see how this lens handles bright lights. When the sun rays hit the glass, the lens loses a lot of contrast. There's a magenta fireball surrounding the light source. Although the green flares that are stretching on the sides are not bothering, when it comes to bright lights, the performance coming from this super zoom lens is right there in the middle. Average. Now, let me surprise you a bit with the last test, bokeh. We must remember, this is a lens for micro four thirds sensors, so of course the bokeh will be affected, especially here at normal distances using the widest angle. But look now, as soon as we zoom in halfway, the background looks nice and soft. And if we reach 140mm, everything in the background completely disappears. Indeed, at 70mm, there is a slight harshness behind the subject, but it's a nice result. And if we zoom in all the way, we get beautifully blurred backgrounds. A good performance on bokeh, I have to say. If you stay relatively close to the subject and go beyond 70mm, you'll get nice results. While creating this video, I also learned a lot about my go-to lens for vacations. As a conclusion, when it comes to performances, it's on the good side of average. If you have a micro four thirds camera, you'll definitely enjoy this super zoom lens that helps you bring home a lot of photos with less effort. Speaking about photos, let me show you more memories that I've captured with the Panasonic 14-140mm lens. If you enjoyed this video, press that like button and see you in the next lens review.